The dwarves delved deep at that time, seeking beneath Barazimbar for mithril, the metal beyond price that was becoming yearly ever harder to win. Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that, flying from Thangorodrim, had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host of the West, a Balrog of Morgoth. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we will be speaking about the later dwarf holds of Middle-earth, from the Second Age through the Third Age, and we will even mention how they went on into the Fourth Age and beyond, at least some of them. Articles and videos that helped in the creation of today's video may be found in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. We'll start back at Khazad-dum, where our previous video on the Dwarven Strongholds of the Elder Days finished. At the beginning of the Second Age, Khazad-dum was the greatest dwarf stronghold in the western lands of Middle-earth, at least. We cannot be sure of the Dwarven Strongholds in eastern or southern Middle-earth beyond the borders of the map, and the 4 dwarven clans of those lands, but we can be sure they did at least exist and dealt with Sauron's evil in their own ways. In around 40 of the Second Age, since Nogrod and Belegost had fallen into ruin at the end of the First Age, the dwarves of those cities, Firebeards and Broadbeams, made their way to Khazad-dum, migrating there and mixing with the Longbeards. Khazad-dum then entered really into its golden age, and was not truly Moria yet, although some records in the appendices and so forth refer to it thusly, as do the doors of Durin, which were built in the earlier part of the age by the dwarf Narvi and elf Celebrimbor. During these days of peace, the dwarves of Khazad-dum had friendship and trade with the elves in Eregion and men in Rovanion. They mined for mithril and made things of wonder and beauty. The dwarves also expanded outward somewhat, as some dwarves had already settled in the Iron Hills, and others likely dwelt still at Gundabad, though I'm not sure how great or small those settlements really were. Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, was also perhaps under some relative control by the dwarves at this point, but was not really carven out yet. However, after the War of the Elves and Sauron, which saw Eregion ruined, Khazad-dum remained guarded and closed, its western gate sealed, and the Golden Age really ended. This isolated Khazad-dum, allowing for Orcs to eventually take Gundabad, where Durin the Deathless had first awoken, and the dwarves of the Iron Hills remained cut off from their capital in Khazad-dum, and probably came to face threats of their own. However, after the War of the Last Alliance and the defeat of Sauron at the end of the Age, the dwarves could surely re-establish many of these connections between their strongholds, but, especially without the elves of Eregion, they would not be as close with elves generally. Sure, there were the elves of Lorinond, later Lothlorien, but many of these were not Noldor, the craftsmen with whom the dwarves actually quite liked, and the relationship just wasn't the same with the elves of Rivendell. But regardless, the dwarves would continue their doings, mining ever deeper and deeper for mithril, until in 1980 of the Third Age, they'd mined so deeply in their search that they found at last a Balrog, who had fled to this cave beneath Khazad-dum during or after the War of Wrath, and his awakening changed the fate of the dwarves forever. Khazad-dum, then more widely known as Moria, meaning Black Abyss, was forsaken, and the dwarves fled eastwards towards Erebor, and likely others went into the Iron Hills. The dwarves settled in the Lonely Mountain, carving out the new capital of the Longbeards, and they remained there for a few centuries until the king of the Longbeards, at that time, abandoned Erebor for the Grey Mountains to the north in 2210, joining dwarves who were already in these mountains while others stayed at Erebor. These others sought to make new mansions for one reason or another. Perhaps they thought there would be greater riches like mithril in those mountains that were not at Erebor, or that one mountain would not be vast enough for the dwarves who had once had an entire kingdom in the Misty Mountains. I'm unsure, but due to the great dragon presence, the War of the Dwarves and Dragons saw the end of dwarven civilization in those mountains, except perhaps for a few dwarves that did remain, so the Longbeards returned to Erebor to once more make it their capital in 2590. Of course, the dwarves remained in Erebor, and it was their kingdom under the mountain, yet still not as grand as Moria had been. A common theme of the decline of the vast beauty and wonder of civilization in Tolkien's works, yet Erebor was still grand. So grand, in fact, that a dragon, Smaug, attacked it and took it for his own in 2770 of the Third Age. The dwarves who survived the dragon attack were exiles of their home, and they came to dwell in small halls in the mountains of Dunland for some years. They dwelt here until King Thror was slain by Azog, one of the defiling orcs that had come to dwell in Moria, near the Balrog. And this began the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. During this conflict, the dwarves retook Gundabad and would yet retain mastery over it for a time afterwards, until some orcs came there again later in the age. Yet, although King Thrain hoped to retake Moria entirely, Dane Ironfoot knew the Balrog still prevented that from happening. And so, the 7 dwarven clans that got revenge on the Orcs departed for their distant homes once again, including the Longbeards of the Iron Hills, and Thrain and Thorin led their people back to Dunland, eventually going further north and west to make other halls in the eastern Blue Mountains as well. The dwarves remained here, remembering their old homes and evils done to them, which eventually led Thrain to his capture, and Thorin Oakenshield to his adventure to reclaim the Lonely Mountain from Smaug in 2941. After much hardship and sacrifice, Erebor was reclaimed, the Orcs of the Misty Mountains defeated once more, and King Dane Ironfoot of the Iron Hills began his rule there. After the dwarves reclaimed Erebor, some, like Balin and others, wished to also try to retake Moria, but failed in the attempt. The return of Erebor to the dwarves greatly strengthened the northern strongholds of elves, dwarves, and men, and trade and partnership returned. But then came the War of the Ring, which saw Easterlings and evils from Dol Guldur attack the north, and the Easterlings came to the very gates of Erebor, and perhaps the Iron Hills also saw battle with them. During this same war, Gandalf the Grey and the Fellowship of the Ring traversed Moria, and the wizards slew the Balrog, allowing a future chance for reclamation, as portended by Dane during the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, that they might one day retake it after the world had changed and a power came through the mines. But Dane Ironfoot would not live to see it, as he was slain in the Battle of Dale. But once the One Ring was destroyed in the south and Sauron was finally truly defeated, great relief came to the dwarves and their home of Erebor. The dwarves would finally enter into a new golden age, as would the men of Middle-earth, even as the elves departed. Erebor would be made safe, the Iron Hills and Blue Mountains still had dwarves living there, and their mines still operated, most likely. And Gimli, elf friend, would establish a new dwarf colony in the White Mountains, in the glittering caves of Aglarond near the Hornburg. What's more, a descendant of Dane Ironfoot, as soon as his grandson, but perhaps a more distant descendant, would be the 7th and final Durin, and it was his fate to reclaim Moria, Khazad-dum from the Orcs, and perhaps Gundabad also. Except for the abandoned Dwarven Strongholds, likely those of the Grey Mountains and Dunland, the homes of the dwarves throughout the 2nd and 3rd Ages would have dwarves in them once more, even into the 4th Age and beyond. In their homes, they labored and mined, eventually disappearing from the Middle-earth above and going beneath it over the ages. In their mighty and wonderful strongholds, perhaps they would once more fall into sleep, or dig ever deeper as the tale of the dwarves became a distant song, the clang of hammer on anvil, in the halls far beneath the earth. And so we come to the end of our tale on the strongholds of the dwarves in the 2nd and 3rd Ages. From this story, we see that home is the land where our people dwell, and if we are resilient enough, our homes shall never truly be destroyed or taken from us. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video on the Dwarven Strongholds. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on these Dwarven homes? Let me know in the comments below. It is interesting that, even in comparison to the Dwarven Strongholds of the Elder Days, dwarves moved around a lot, building many halls and many mountains, yet their great ancient homes, Erebor and Khazad-dum especially, could never be replaced, not even in their minds. But once again, as long as their people survived, they always had a home. You can see this throughout how the dwarves migrated, and that, despite their new homes in other places, they still preferred their mansions of old. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Cal Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putin, and Mark Kralik, Blair Scout and Merton, John Hume, Samick B, Matt Sabach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrolik, Brandon Glidden, Molly Sullivan, Daniel Burns, Anthony Harmon, Dorwin Gray, Arthur Merlin, and DJ Vaught. Thank you all so much, and thanks to all of our patrons and YouTube members. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a video on the tale of Fram and Scatha the Dragon. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.